Hi everyone, this is Sam. Welcome to week 3 of the Death of Virgil. We've just been talking about Bob Dylan and whether or not rock and roll can save our soul. Um, or maybe the soul of the nation, I'm not sure. A lot of terrible news day after day. It doesn't seem to let up. Um, so I found reading this book this week to be a particular balm personally. Um, so I'm gonna offer some opening remarks and then we will just open it to conversation. Um, I found myself a little bit sad going over my notes this morning, realizing that after you feel we've been talking about the way this book makes us feel and this sense of being kind of like carried along or submerged or the deluge. And then in book 2, it continues this unfolding, but then there's a transition, even in the first line of book 3. And by the time, let me let Patty in, by the time we get to the end of book 3, we realize we're at the end already. And so Brock is, of course, playing with different forms of consciousness throughout the book. And in the second movement, we have the fever dreams, the hallucinations, we have inner monologue, and we also have inner dialogue. And so I found myself also thinking a little bit about Hamlet, who's never too very far from mind, and the way in which Shakespeare played with monologues and soliloquies in terms of form, and the way in which we can, through writing, try to capture the inner movements of the mind. So a monologue dramatically on stage would presume an audience, but a soliloquy, and of course the most famous example is to be or not to be, right? And is a kind of inner dialogue where he's having a conversation with himself. Hannah Arendt didn't go to Hamlet, she went to Richard III. Am I a murderer? Am I? By and by, and so there's a sense of self-interrogation. And in book 2, this feeling, this mood of self-interrogation kind of heats up, I want to say. But this is going to change in book 3, and we're going to get those moments of inner monologue, inner dialogue, those kind of hallucinations and fever dreams are going to appear more as punctuation, more as almost an interruption to the actual conversations that are being had between real people who are now in the room with our poet Virgil. And we get what I think technically we have to consider the climax of the novel in this third movement, which is the long conversation with Caesar, with the Caesar. And then we get it's going to end with Virgil dictating his will. So I think it was a little helpful last week, so I'll just quickly go through. So we have 7 different subsections in the third movement. The first part extends from page 233 to 261, and it's going to return us to one of our motifs, which is the motif of laughter. And you'll notice that in the 7th part, or we're going to come back to laughter at the end of subsection 6 and the beginning of subsection 7, where Virgil's going to tell us that laughter is the sister of death. So we get a kind of reading on philosophically on what laughter is. So, but we're, in the beginning, in part 1, we get laughter and death. And there's a question being put on the table from the beginning that's also going to form the central part of his debate, his fight, his confrontation with Caesar. And it's the question of what is true reality. Let me let Peter in. So what is true reality? And within that, we're going to have, so if I was like taking notes, I'd write true reality. Then there's going to be discussions of language and representations of reality. So metaphor, what is the function of metaphor? What is perception? And I'm going to talk about that. I saw that was a question in our group thread. What is knowledge? And what is true reality? So one of the lines that's going to repeat in section 3, in movement 3, is love is reality. The only true reality is love. And maybe a nice question for us to talk about is, well, what kind of love is Virgil talking about? What is this love? So part 2 is going to go from about page 261 to 272. So we get a kind of shorter section. And so in that first one, though, just let me add, we have a kind of cast of characters that appears now. So in the first one, we have Plotius, and we're going to have Lucius. And it's not, the slave is in the room, or the boy is in the room who had read from the Aeneid, but we don't really see him. And then, so in part 2, so 261 to 272, Plotius and Lucius are going to leave, and Virgil is going to be in the room with the boy who is going to pick up reading the Aeneid, again, a few lines on page 262. And then the slave is in the room. So we go from these different, we've been talking about the threes, we go from Virgil, Plotius, and Lucius to Virgil, the boy, and the slave. And all of these characters are doing different things in the text. So then the third part is 272 to 291, and this is the scene with the doctor. And Virgil's going to be cleansed, he's going to be shaven, he's going to be given milk like a little boy. There's this kind of growing angst that he's being treated like an infant. And when I was reading this section, I kind of had the sense that almost the body was being prepared, right? That he's unable to wash himself, he's unable to feed himself. There's this kind of full sense of caretaking. So now we have the doctor and the slave and Virgil. And then part 4 is 291 to 303. And this is going to be one of those kind of moments of almost, I'll say, interjection, where we have Virgil the slave, and we have a character who's very central to this third movement, but does not actually appear, Plotia. Plotia, who's going to be a kind of specter. Plotia is going to be, sometimes when I'm reading this book, I almost imagine Plotia as Diotima, even though I know that's not the what she is, but she is a kind of muse of love, right? And Virgil chastises himself here for never having written a line of love for Plotia. What has his love been